hear us?
Sure.
Yes, I can. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Thanks, Cecilia. So before we get started,
Yep.
we're televising this, and it's a little bit clunky sometimes. So
Gotcha.
Zoom won't be able to easily keep up with conversation in the room. So if we ask questions and want Zoom people to speak, we'll just have to pause briefly to allow them to catch up, if that makes sense, and we can adjust the volume.
Okay, perfect. All right. Hi, everybody. I am Sarah Mills-Knapp. I'm the Director of Sustainability at the Greater Portland Council of Governments. We are working with Freeport to help support them to get enrolled in the Community Resilience Partnership, which is the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation in the Future's grant program for sustainability and municipal climate action planning. So today we're here to talk a little bit about a wide range of things. Let me see if this works. There we go. We're going to talk a little bit about the partnership. We're going to do a brief kind of overview of hazards and impacts, which I'm sure you all know about as you're here today, so you must be concerned. But we do have some Freeport-specific maps, some data that we'll go over a little bit, just to kind of help set the stage for the discussion about enrollment in the program and what priority areas Freeport might be interested in. Then we will talk about the priority action areas that Freeport's considered so far and have a little open house, questions. We have descriptions of the projects out on the table out there, so you can go vote with green stickers about which ones you think should be priorities. I'll explain a little bit about how many votes you get and why, and we can talk more about that. So happy to take questions at the end, but I also am happy to be interrupted if people have burning questions, so we can be informal about this. So the Community Resilience Partnership is a municipal climate action planning support that the state, that really grew out of the state's main Won't Wait, the state climate action plan. They identified that obviously many of the goals that they created at the state level are really being implemented at the local level. So they wanted to make sure to provide as much support as possible across the state to municipalities who are going to need to be doing this work. There are multiple levels of grants being awarded. The two that we're going to talk about today is the service provider grant, which GPCOG was awarded to help support multiple towns in getting enrolled. And that's the work we've been doing with Freeport so far. And then the community action grant, that's the grant you get once you get enrolled in the program, you can apply for the action grants. They did not make it super straightforward and simple, but basically GoPIF sort of at the top, there's a layer of regional coordinators, which GPCOG acts as a regional coordinator with some others for the region, the southern Maine region, then service providers, and then municipalities can access grants directly. So the first round of grants closed in this late spring, and you can get up to $50,000 for a particular project. And there was, I think, 24 awards this spring. They awarded almost all the communities that applied. And as you can see, it's across the state. There's some examples of ones in our region. GPCOG's working with Wyndham to do a town energy plan. Bridgeton's doing an open space plan. Portland applied to develop a resilience overlay for their zoning. And South Portland's working on a complete streets design. And just also, more broadly in the region, obviously Portland and South Portland have climate action plan, One Climate Future that they developed together. Cumberland has a climate action plan, and we are in the works right now with Falmouth in developing a climate action plan for a local level action. So the goal of the service provider engagement with Freeport was really to get the town enrolled in order to access funding. But beyond that, to really, sort of kick off some community engagement around understanding what priorities for climate action people see in the community, both for resilience and clean energy. And then to get the town ready as soon as possible to apply for the for the community action grants in September. So we have been working with 5 towns, Freeport, Yarmouth, North Yarmouth, Brunswick, and Cumberland in this service provider work. So it's kind of a nice cohort of regional of action around the region and kind of sharing and doing knowledge sharing across towns, which was really helpful. So talk a little bit about hazards and impacts. And I can slow down on anything if people feel the need to ask questions. Some of this is a little bit dense, but I don't think it's stuff that you don't know. So in terms of climate impacts. When we're talking about impacts, we're talking about sort of the combination of hazards, which may be climate hazards, sea level rise, increased heat, and changing precipitation and weather patterns, mixed with existing social vulnerabilities, sort of create the climate impacts that we are seeing. So that's in terms of definitions. And existing social vulnerabilities, we have some census data here today about, particular income patterns, people's existing health challenges, access to food, those kind of things all make up existing social vulnerabilities. One second. Not moving. One second. Got a spinning wheel here. So once this does advance, I'll be talking a little bit about climate hazards and just setting the scene. So those are increased heat, like I talked about. Maine has warmed 3 degrees already since 1895. I'm going to get the dates wrong now that I don't have the slides. And we'll see, projected heat increases into 2050 as well. We're looking at, I think, around 36 high heat days at 2100 combined, compared to about 1 high heat day, 1 to 3 or 4 that we see now. Oop. Uh-oh. Second. There we go. All right. There we go. So this kind of sets the stage for particular climate hazards I'll be talking about: sea level rise, ocean warming and acidification, increased precipitation and storm intensity, and warming, more variable temperatures. And those all lead to impacts that we are seeing now already in the community, and we'll certainly see into the future: coastal erosion, flooding, changing ecosystems, shifting fishing industry, overburdened wastewater systems, impacts to infrastructure, people, et cetera. So like I said, we're really facing much warmer weather than Maine is currently experiencing now, and we've already seen some warming since 1895. We'll be looking at 36 high heat days, which is over 90 degrees of heat. So looking at changing precipitation, this is an area in which there are not super clear trends, and it's a pretty complex shifting weather pattern. So there's not like a one clear trend that's really easy to see for the Northeast. They think average yearly precipitation in Maine is going to increase around 15%, and what we'll see is a change in type of precipitation, so somewhat less snow, more icing events. What they do know is there's definitely a likely increase in intensity and variability of precipitation, so very intense periods of rain and intense storms combined with periods of drought. And that is a formula for flooding. So we'll talk about that today. In terms of sea level rise, we've seen 7.5 inches of sea level rise in Portland Harbor since 1912. And this is a sort of current range of sea level rise, although they have new data coming out that sort of takes away the 8-foot, the very extreme sea level rise scenario. As the modeling gets better, they've started to sort of shrink the range of what they think is possible, and that very high 8-foot range has now been reduced. So the state is asking all municipalities to plan for a 1.5-foot increase in sea level rise at 2050, with a possibility of a 3.5-foot increase, and that is variable based on rapid ice melt events that may happen, based on emission scenarios, which that the globe reaches the Paris Agreement or not, and then obviously just also modeling the various range of error that a model might have. So that's kind of where the range is looking. And that amount of sea level rise really brings about 15 to 20 times more nuisance flooding than we're already seeing. So that's not storm surge, that's just talking about nuisance flooding, like flooding that happens on sunny days or flooding that happens with really high tides. I'm sure you've all heard the stat that the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than any of the world's oceans. It's warmed almost a half a degree Fahrenheit per year, and the Casco Bay temperatures have increased 2.5 degrees as well. So what does this all mean, for people in Freeport? It certainly brings health risks and challenges to the economy, looking at shifting ecosystems, the loss of habitat that support a lot of our economy here in Maine. A strain on critical infrastructure. We'll talk today about roads, bridges, culverts, everything that we need to use in order to reach the services in the area. Changing natural resource economy that we're all very reliant here in Maine. We'll see a decline in inland water quality, so fresh water is really at risk, and like we talked about, some flooding and erosion as well. So as part of our work, we have created some mapping using a flood database that looks specifically using climate projections. So this is not like the FEMA flood maps, which are sort of based on historical precipitation and storms, but looking at actually modeling out climate change scenarios. So we have up here and here on the picture, this is kind of a zoom in. The areas that are pink in this map are areas where the roads will likely be inundated. This is a 100-year flood at 2050. So across Freeport, we're looking at around 100 roads that potentially could be flooded. This is, of course, modeling. We do not know exact information about this, but this starts to give the town an understanding of where they should be looking at what roads might be and what other critical infrastructure might be at risk. So there's certainly a potential for neighborhoods to be cut off, from access to services, and certainly challenges with accessing other critical infrastructure. This, this is, again, a model, like I said, and it's hard to know, especially at certain sites, what particular, land components might be different. This is really just a starting point to sort of see where areas might be at risk. As you can see, there's significant inland flooding because of the rivers and creeks that you have here in Freeport. So this is not just sea level rise and storm surge, but this is the increased precipitation as well. So also talking about ecosystems, this is a map here that we have on our intertidal data portal, which shows existing marshes and the need to potentially migrate those marshes. So with 3 feet of sea level rise, as sea levels rise, the need for marshes to continue to be healthy, they need to move inland. But that only works if you're not butting up against development and roads and other types of infrastructure. So the green is existing marshes, the yellow is where they might need to sort of migrate at 3.3 feet of sea level rise. The red outline is sort of areas that's at 3.9 feet at 2100 of sea level rise. And this also is just showing some, in purple, the softshell clam habitat and the waterfowl and wading bird habitat. So just to show that, there are significant key habitats and ecosystems in Freeport. The eelgrass beds and obviously shellfish habitat and aquaculture viability could be threatened. So I talked a little bit about social vulnerability before. Not everybody will experience the impacts of climate change equally. And these are just some of the census data, which of course we know is not exact. But this is just a little snapshot of the census data and some research we've done about the potential social vulnerabilities. These are we picked out. So residents 65 or older and living alone, homeowners that are cost burdened, cost burdened households obviously have less of an ability to sort of bounce back from an emergency or a climate hazard event and to respond and be resilient to potential changes. And obviously the housing stock, like much of Maine, is quite old. So talk a little bit about emissions. Freeport does not have an updated town-wide emissions inventory, but we pulled a little bit of data from a tool that we have just to look at transportation emissions. So 4.2% of total emissions for transportation in Cumberland County are from Freeport, and that's a little bit higher than so 2.8% is the population share of Freeport. So that the transportation emissions are higher than the population share. And then in terms of the estimated greenhouse gases per household, it's actually the fourth highest in Cumberland County as a town. And this data is based primarily on transportation emissions data. So this is just a snapshot of the state greenhouse gas inventory. Most towns, as well as the state, in transportation is the biggest share of emissions when you're looking at an inventory for the state level, and most towns in the area, except for Portland, which is obviously denser, more people are walking. So in places like Portland, their residential and commercial building emissions are higher than their share than their transportation. So that's just a kind of a brief overview of data. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to chat, and we'll have some time to look at the maps later. But I wanted to just jump into the service provider activities and what the town is looking to do. So in order to enroll in the grant program, the town will need to pass a municipal resolution that identifies priority action areas at like a kind of a high level. They don't have to be super detailed. It names existing staff or committee members that can help support implementation. The state really wants to see that you have somebody who can shepherd, the project through. And then some optional language on climate hazards and impacts. So this would need to be passed by September. The town's also gone through a self-evaluation and sort of looked over a list of community actions to see which ones they've done, and just to pull out a few things from there. They've identified, obviously, flooding from the river, inundation from sea level rise and storm surge, and then degradation of infrastructure due to extreme storms and increased heat. This has all been done with the town and in work that they've done with the county EMA and other emergency, looking at emergency management planning. These are some of the things that have been pulled out. In terms of progress to date that they identified through the self-assessment, to develop some key ordinances and plans to target flooding, the shoreline zoning, and I think Caroline and Cecilia could speak more directly to those if you have questions. And obviously there are opportunities coming now to include climate risk in the comprehensive plan update and the potential for a climate action plan to be developed. And then developing a local emergency management plan that can really look at what potential local emergencies may happen given climate hazards and what responses and solutions could be. And that's something that's being planned already, correct? Great.
I can answer some questions related to that.
Great.
Where we're at with that process. So if I can say it now, or I can do it later.
Yeah, please go ahead. Oh.
Yeah,
Okay, perfect.
Good evening, folks. My name is Paul Colley. I'm the fire chief and the EMA director for the town of Freeport. So I started as chief in December, and a couple of things that are on my forefront of my activities is our emergency management plan. So there's two plans that we just recently had the council adopt the countywide emergency, the countywide hazard mitigation plan. 27 towns in Cumberland County all had to take and give their actions as far as things we've done as far as mitigation. And also those have to be updated every year. So part of this discussion that you folks are participating in will feed into that based upon things as far as road infrastructure, flooding, and so forth. This all will spill over into the community emergency management plan, which is under review right now, and I've got a constituent group of key stakeholders in town, business, public safety, social services, FCS people, and so forth, to work our way through that so that basically anything happens in this town, we've got a reference to go to kind of set things into gear. Those are requirements and stuff, but also too is getting back to the hazard mitigation plan, is that they've basically identified including some of the climate action things into it as far as moving forward, so that we're eligible for grants. So it is kind of tied together.
Great.
So, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
When you showed the data for the various numbers, have we ever done, or have you done an analysis that says, here's the risk and here's the probability of occurrence?
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So just in general, when you develop a risk management plan, you say, okay, the probability that this event's going to occur
Yep.
is 80% or 60%. So I was just curious if you had that kind of data associated with your assumptions.
Yeah, so it depends on the particular hazard that we're talking about. So with flooding, we use the same approach that FEMA does. So what they call a 100-year flood, which is they think the probability of it happening is a 1 in 100 years. But the challenge is now is that what we're seeing as the climate changes, things are happening more frequently. The climate models cannot say with any real certainty how much more frequently right now 100-year storms would happen, except that we know that they're going to be more frequent. That's sort of like the trend is understood, but the exact percentage of likelihood is not. In terms of sea level rise, pretty well understanding of the range of sea level rise that is likely at 2050, given the past sea level rise that we've seen. So there's sort of observational data. So we have tide gauges across the coast, and they can see, they have information going back 30 years, so they can kind of use that. But there's not, like when we do the work that we do in terms of looking at vulnerability assessments, we can't say there's an 80% chance that 2050, there'll be a 100-year flood, because that is.
Right, and my question is really, so you said something about,
We're going to increase our water, the tidal component, in the next 30 years, 4 or 5 feet, I believe you said.
So it's 1.5 feet at 2050 is the most so the range of emission scenarios. If we it's sort of a complex thing, because it's the emission scenarios that may happen, right? So that's one component that is we can't know for certain. And then the other component within that is like modeling accuracy is somewhat, that's where they get that range. So it's between 1.5 and 3.5 feet is the rate of the likely range of sea level rise that we'll see. So they kind of give it that range because of the a lot of unknowns.
Right, and so the question would be, what's the probability of that data actually occurring?
Yeah.
Because that might have potential on zoning in the floodplains or whatever.
Exactly.
Close to it. So it's important to kind of look at probability of the numbers being accurate, right?
Yeah. So what the state has said, so I don't have like a 99% probability that it's going to be 1.5 feet, but what the state has said with the Climate Action Plan is that every municipality should plan for, which is like, a pretty much 100% chance of at least 1.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050. So they're asking all municipalities to plan for that. And then a potential with the ability to understand how to manage 3.5 feet at 2050. So that's sort of the language that the state uses to encourage. In any one area, it can be very different. Obviously, our coastline is very different here in Freeport than it is in Scarborough. So those land differences make a lot of differences when you're talking about sea level rise as well. The best thing that you can do, the best data that you can get is actually being developed right now. Hydrodynamic modeling, so looking at wave action and how waves might impact the coast. The state is doing some of that. But if you have areas of concern, the best thing to do is really to model that one particular area. And then you can get to those much more specific data, but it's expensive to do. So there's engineering firms that can give you a hydrodynamic model of one particular piece of your coast. Like in Falmouth, they're doing a model for their town landing because it floods all the time already, so they need to understand what they're looking at in terms of risk. So you really need to get down to that very specific geographic area in order to answer some of those questions more accurately.
Your mask.
It's okay. I can always restate the question as well.
Okay, so technically, the minimum is 1.5, maximum 3.5 by 2050.
Yeah.
But are they not going beyond 2050 and saying that by 2080 it definitely will get like 3.5?
So,
Or when you're, doing zoning and stuff like that for marshes
Yep.
and estuaries and that sort of thing, if you're going to do some work now, why wouldn't you just say, well, eventually?
yeah. Yeah, so they're looking at a 2100 full timeline. So in terms of like how far into the future climate models are looking right now. So at 2100, the 3.9 feet is most likely of that kind of middle scenario. So the state currently is not asking towns to plan out to 2100, but the data is available about what the sort of highest probability of sea level rise at 2100 is. So it's certainly, the data is there for you to consider. And some of our maps do have, I think, the 3 foot, I think that one does, the sea level rise on it. So you can, that's a nice thing about some of the mapping models we have, is you can choose, the scenario that you're looking at, and the year that you would like to plan for. Yeah. So the data is out there.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
It seems like planning to 2050.
Yeah.
Does this thing work?
So you can't hear it in the room, but everybody who's online can hear you
Okay,
now.
fine.
Yeah.
Daniel Freund.
Thank you.
It would, my own opinion is that planning to 2050 is unfortunately remarkably short-sighted.
Yeah.
28 years. The Vietnam War feels not that far away. Desert Storm wasn't so far away, but that's the time frame you're talking about.
Yeah,
It's
you
not
get a
that
home
far
loan.
away.
That's
And when you look at the cost, the social cost, the taking of land through changing in zoning, it has profound impacts. And the infrastructure that you're going to build. This is a poor way to build a society when you have a time frame that is barely a generation away. So I don't know how the state came to the planning decision of encouraging people to look at the minimum, and well, you can look beyond that. So I don't know where the state is in that process, but I would be in favor of the state encouraging people to look at 100 years, not to 2100, which is only 78 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
By then.
It's not about my lifespan, It's about what's prudent for our culture. And this time horizon is, I think, woefully inadequate. Thank you.
Yeah, so many things that the state says to do are the bare minimum, and it's not. It's certainly possible to go beyond all of this. It's just sort of their representation of it's like a building code, or like here's the bare minimum everybody should be doing, which is really quite forward thinking for at the state level, because not a lot of states across the country are starting to really make those very clear recommendations. So it's good to have a baseline, and then you can certainly do more. Yeah.
And I agree.
I agree that 70 years is probably not a long time. I don't plan to be here in 70 years, so, but the question really becomes, what's the probability of the risk occurring?
Yeah.
Right? So unless you can tell me that the probability is, 70 or above, then you can say whatever you want, and people are not going to take it seriously, right? So that's the issue that I see. You can say that, 100 years from now, 5,000 years from now, right? It's what's the probability of occurrence is what people will drive to. So, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. It would be super helpful in order to say with very, clear, like this is the percentage that this is going to happen. I think with the sea level rise, you can say pretty confidently that 1.5 feet of sea level rise is going to happen. But it's really hard. A lot of this, is based on data and science that's evolving that we're talking about. Right now, they actually just came out with a good 2020 sea level rise data that I was looking at before I came here that's really interesting about just the ways in which they're getting more accurate. So I think in the next decade, we will certainly see much more accurate data. And actually in the next few years, just in the state of Maine, we'll see much more accurate data coming out as well.
I would just like to point out, Daniel again, I would just like to point out there are important immediate externalities which have not come into this conversation.
Yeah.
We've all just experienced and are still experiencing COVID, which has completely transformed the transportation of workers and the flow on the highway. We can still remember, I can still remember when COVID first happened and you could drive down the highway and see no one.
Yeah.
Okay? And so our society is a lot more flexible than people think, and there just hasn't been a will by the government to tell people that's not a choice anymore. The other externality, which is really important right now, which is immediately impacting this, is the war. Okay? Because of the war and the dislocation in the energy market, a lot of people are moving towards renewables a lot faster. So I could see a lot of these predictions here being off by 50, 80% in 24 months, just from externalities that are not part of it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't plan. It means people should plan conservatively.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that there are many uncertainties that come into play. And so, the best that we can do is work with the data information we have right now. And that picture changes rapidly, as we've all seen. So, yeah.
Before you go on, do we just want to see if there's anyone online who has any questions thus far? It
Yep.
looks like we have a Q&A, but there's no questions in there. We don't have the chat feature on, just the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
But if anyone on Zoom wants to ask a question on anything presented thus far, they can raise your hand and we'll bring you over to ask your question. All right, I don't see any hands raised. Thanks.
Great. So we just wanted to, talk about some of the projects that have completed to date in Freeport. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but I just wanted to highlight a few just to sort of set the stage for discussion about what next priorities might be. So this is, I don't need to read it all out to you, and I'm sure some of you know as you work on committees here in the town. But they've done some work on building and energy codes, a complete streets policy, preservation of open space, lowered parking requirements. I know there was a lot of consideration in the Freeport downtown visioning about sustainability, so you all are not starting from zero, and there's a lot of work that's been done to date, both on municipal operations, but also on town-wide approaches. So, these priority action areas, I would love to have anybody from the committee come up and talk about the ones that they've selected, and Caroline or others can talk about what the town is thinking, but these are the sort of priority action areas that have risen up for consideration for the grant, for the next grant round. So just a reminder, actually, and I don't know if I said this before, this first grant round, or it would be the second of the whole program in September, closes September 20th, but there'll be 2 more rounds of grant applications next year as well, and then hopefully the program will continue on as well. The grant, the grant pot is expected to continue, obviously, pending the governor's reelection. But the hope is that it would be funded for the next fiscal year as well. And so this program is, hopefully will be continuing on. And once you're enrolled, you can apply twice a year for action grants. So there are, it's helpful to come up with more than one priority action area. So we'll give everybody 3 dots to vote on the area that they are most interested in, so that the town could have, 3 good ideas of priority areas.
I will be speaking on behalf of Freeport Sustainability Advisory Board.
Great.
We are one of the boards that had the privilege of having the opportunity to give input on the process and the priorities. And the ones that our board selected were, from that list, the climate action plan and the resiliency plan. And those, as we all know, and you obviously do know because you're doing the work, GPCOG is already in process executing that vision. So to the extent that we could provide any funding for the implementation of any recommendations that come out of that plan, that would be wonderful. We also wanted to put a vote for the tree greening of the town, tree planting, shrubs, anything that makes the greenery better, especially because it correlates to the downtown visioning plan. A lot of the things that we selected are very much in sync with that plan, so we figured that it would be a good use of grant money to fund some of the priorities that have been identified by principal in the downtown visioning plan. The other priority from that plan also was to make transportation greener and reduce the vehicle miles traveled in town, which includes fostering interest in the breeze, Amtrak, biking and walking, sidewalks, even establishing a satellite parking to just shuttle people in during the busy season so we don't have a million cars driving into town, polluting the air and just clogging up the space and just burning fuel. And then as of late, we have found out that Yarmouth has contacted the state about using the grant money from the resiliency grants to basically hire a part-time coordinator, and that they pitched this as a regional approach so that Freeport could be one of the regional partners that they could share that position with. So we're also interested in considering that as one of our priorities.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the other priorities came also from a survey that we shared internally with municipal staff and others in Freeport to sort of weigh in on what areas they think might be a priority for climate action. Improving municipal buildings, so doing building upgrades, looking at efficiency, and also electrifying some fleet vehicles. Was one of the things, and creating a sort of climate change education, outreach, and engagement program that would be town-wide. That was an idea. And then integrating climate considerations into the local emergency management plan, which appears to be happening, but there could be additional work that could be supported there. And then the standardizing assessment of climate considerations. This is something that we're working on with some other towns right now, where we're developing like a project screening tool so that when the town goes to look at capital investments, they can put that project through a screening tool that kind of screens for sustainability benefits, looks at potential impacts on socially vulnerable communities, and really brings climate considerations into the investment discussion process so that capital investments can kind of include that climate consideration. I think that's everything. Is there any questions? Yes.
Can I talk about the priorities?
Oh, yes, sure. You go up there. Perfect. Thank you.
I can barely hear Valley from across the room. So, sorry. I'm Mason Morfitt from District 3, and I'm here on behalf of Freeport Climate Action Now. We're praising you and the town for this exercise. We have reviewed the list of possible actions provided by the state, and we've selected 3 that we would consider priorities. And in selecting those, we sought potential projects that would first provide the greatest impact, particularly with respect to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Second, utilize all of the $50,000 available per grant. Third, align to the degree possible with priorities listed by the Freeport Sustainable Advisory Board. And all other things being equal, provide easily recognizable and tangible benefit to as many people in town as possible. Excuse me. So with that criteria in mind, we're endorsing the following potential projects listed here in no particular order of priority. And since a lot of people in this room and online probably haven't seen the full list of suggested state actions, I'll quote them. Number F1 is, quote, conduct a community vulnerability assessment that identifies climate risks and vulnerable populations and includes a review of existing plans and policies. Adopt a climate resilience plan that describes high-priority strategies for reducing risk and vulnerabilities, which is what we're talking a lot about here. We think that project would have broad scope, community-wide relevance, high community educational potential, coincide with the comprehensive plan already committed to, utilize the skills of the planned sustainability coordinator, whose salary was approved in the budget last night, and which salary it might cover, and include an emphasis on vulnerable populations, which is consistent with Freeport Climate Action's now commitment to equity and inclusion. This is also listed as one of FSAB's priorities. A5, which is, quote, implement strategies that increase public transit ridership and alternative transportation modes, including bike and walking infrastructure. This project would have community-wide visibility and appeal, easily use up all of the available grant money on related infrastructure development, coincide with both the Downtown Vision Plan and the Comprehensive Plan, as well as Freeport Climate Action's now efforts to increase public transportation ridership, also ranked a priority by FSAB. Third, B1, adopt and execute a plan for energy efficiency and building envelope weatherization improvements for municipal buildings, collaboration with local school district for school building improvements. To the town's credit, some of this is already done. We suspect a lot more could be done. Additional energy efficiency and weatherization could significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, could easily absorb the full amount of available grant money, and has community-wide visibility and benefit.
Great.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and I like the framework for considering the various, considering the criteria. It's really helpful for thinking about the options. I think it's hard. Obviously, these are all important priorities. It's hard to say one is more important than the other, but the town does need to sort of decide on an approach for the next grant round. So in terms of, getting feedback, and if there are other questions or discussion items, yeah.
So, when you're
I'm sorry. So what we're really talking about is just the service component, which is either the 5 towns sharing, 50,000, or the town itself getting 50,000, as I understand it. So the question really becomes, what happens if we get to 10? We split it amongst the 5 towns and we get 10,000, right?
No, you'll get. Sorry, just to clarify, you will get $50,000 as a town, no matter what. So you don't need to split it with the 5 towns. Each town can get up to $50,000. If you go on with another town, like the Yarmouth example, you'd get 100,000. So you still each get 50,000. But this 50,000 is yeah.
So the 50,000 is it's the pot to get the plan or whatever we decide would be the component. So after that, to actually execute the plan, then I understand, I think I understand the law that says we'll have to pony up 10% of the cost of the execution.
No, there's no match. So this is $50,000 grant that requires no matching funds from the town, as long as it aligns with the action areas in the state plan, which all of these do. So you will get you'll get your 50. Basically, you get a check for $50,000. The town does, and then you have 2 years to spend that to implement the project that you applied for. So there's an application process where we'll help the town write up an application to sort of scope out the project. These are sort of action areas, but this is not like a hard project. So tonight we're meant to sort of understand what the priorities are. And then I think we've got a next step here, spend the summer working with the town and committees to really scope that project out so that we can apply. There's a, application format that you have to fill out. And then you have 2 years to implement that action that you applied for.
So, I went through the law and I thought it said, that after you get the starter money to actually plan it, then you would be, you'd need to participate in the sharing of the cost.
No, there's no cost share.
Cool.
So that's
Thank
the exciting thing about it. Yeah, it's free money, which we don't come across that often. Go ahead.
How often can a particular town reapply?
I'm going to apply every grant cycle, which is basically 6 months. So September, there'll be a grant cycle, then next March, and then next September. So
So
there's
even
2
if
a
you're
year.
awarded money in September, you can then.
Apply again in March. Yeah.
Right, for other-
So all of this being said, this is a competitive grant program. So there eventually they awarded all of the grants in the last cycle. We have no idea. My guess is it's going to be more competitive the second time around because more towns are getting ready to apply. The state certainly thinks it's going to be more competitive. So that being said, I think, as long as you put together a strong project, you'll have a pretty good chance. But, it's not a guarantee, but you can apply every single round, which is great. There'll be 3 cycles until this particular pot of money runs out.
Is it one project, or can you split it between 2?
You can split it so it is meant to be one project. If you have one project that's like, create efficiency, improve this building and also buy some fleet vehicles, like something that feels like it goes together. You can't, do two totally disparate things because you can only apply for one project. So it needs to look like it goes together somewhat,
But adding to that, if we applied in September for, thank you. If we applied in September for one project, then the next in March, I guess that would be. And I don't know if that's what you were going at. Is that needing to augment that prior proposal in that same project, or can March be something completely?
Yeah, March completely. So you could apply in September for some project that improves bike pedestrian things, and then in March apply to do a climate action, or climate change education plan.
We could, in theory, have 3 different with those 3 cycles.
Exactly.
3 totally different, unrelated things, but it could also maybe be the same or augmenting the same project.
It could be if you're building on it. I think the state would want to see that you have like a next phase. So if you did some planning on the bike ped thing and then you really wanted to implement a project, I think they'd want to see that it would build on it. But as long as you show that you're sort of making progress in that area.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. We'd love for people to sort of get up, take a look at the maps. We have some out in the hallways where the project descriptions are. We have green stickers. You only get 3. So you can vote on your sort of top 3 priority areas. And I'm here for questions. For people online, we will post the posters. We have a PDF that we'll share, and we have a survey link that we will put in the chat or the Q&A so that people can click on the link and then go vote on this using the survey.
Before we get up, 2 things. Do you want to see if anyone online has any questions? And then what if somebody has an idea that they feel is really important is not on the list? Do they have options to add that?
Yes. So, everybody online, please do raise your hand if you have questions. I'm happy to take any additional questions. We do have, we've got stickies. There we go. We have stickies for people online. Please just put in the Q&A if you have questions. If you have a project idea that hasn't been thought of that you think is best idea in the world, happy to take that through the Q&A. Or I think the survey might have a open fill-in where you can just put in other ideas. If you have ideas here, you can write them on a sticky and put them on the project descriptions out in the hallway. Or just come talk to me as well. Happy to discuss,
So for people providing their own ideas, should we provide a list of all the action areas that the state provided? Because we don't want to prioritize a project that is not included on that list.
Yeah, we can put the link in the chat as well, just to the list of community actions. All of the priorities that we've suggested align quite well and that you have all come up with. So I think these aren't our concern, but if somebody comes up with an idea that it's good to check it against the list of community actions just in case. Yeah, Mason.
Does the board outside have all of the project ideas from the state or just those?
It just has these listed, and we did a little bit of a write-up of the potential benefits coming from each project and then a little equity piece. The state is certainly interested that the towns have thought through what equity components of the project that you're doing. So we just highlighted some of those because I think that really does strengthen the competitiveness of an application, is to make sure that you've sort of thought through those issues.
I have one other question. Online, I believe it was the action list gave some links to other possible funding out there for you know, if you want to plant trees, like Project Canopy could be your source, or energy efficiency main. Is there a preference given to projects that couldn't be funded in another way, or how are they? Do we know how they're considering that at this point?
I have been told, and I believe it, that the state agencies, at least within state pots of money, if somebody applies, you know, all of the projects got funded the last round, so this is sort of not an issue, but if somebody applies and it's not a great fit for this particular community resilience partnership, maybe it's a good fit for a shore and harbor planning grant or a coastal community grant, that they will sort of share that information and suggest, GoPIF might suggest to you, hey, I think this other pot of money is a good place for you to go towards. That is only state specific grants, but they also may, you know, it's possible that if you have a project that could be, the only example I can think of is like FEMA's brick funding, so that's a huge pot of money, so it probably wouldn't align, but they may float some other, you know, federal level grants to you as suggestions. Yeah.
Are the responses by any community public record, so that another community could say, we're thinking of doing a bike path, and then it's, oh, look at what they did in J Main, look at what they did in Machias, and get some ideas from that? Or are we being set up to be competing with each other so that we don't share that information? It would seem unfortunate if it's the latter.
So since this is a new program, so as the regional coordinator working on this program, we've been pushing GoPIF to create, they have a website, but create a place where people can do that knowledge sharing.
Yeah.
The state is open to it, they just haven't created it yet, essentially. So one of the things, you know, our job is to certainly, we're in discussions and talks with other planning organizations, with other groups across the state, service providers who are working on this, and like we're generally aware of the different projects that are being funded, so we can try and help make those connections. For projects that don't get funded, there is no real way to know, I think, but as of right now, the project applications are not public. It's just a short summary of, like, on the project website, on the program website, they have a list of all of the projects that have been funded from this round with a short description. So you could always reach out, or you could reach out to GoPIF to try and connect you with a town that you feel like may be related, yeah, or of interest. Sorry, in the back, and then I'll come here in the front.
Yeah, just a quick question. So when you, like an item that says reduce vehicle miles traveled, that to me seems narrow.
Mm-hmm.
So do we take those as specific events, or could you say, you know, we wanted to increase our internet and put it on the ground for fiber, you know, in the whole community, and that would increase the capability of not traveling at all. Mm-hmm. So how does that work in the? Yeah,
so like I said, if you do have a particular priority area like broadband that might not be on this list, like happy to hear about it. This particular list is pretty high level, like reducing vehicle miles traveled is pretty broad, except that this is specifically interested in transit and bike ped. So, you know, happy to hear other approaches. I will say, and I'm happy to discuss, like the broadband one is a good example. A lot of that is being funded through different pots of money already. So it's, I would say the state is very interested in it, but they've just started the Maine Connectivity Authority, and they have several $100 million going to that. So it's like, I think that's why they're letting broadband sort of exist outside of this.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to the comment in the back. There's an organization, A Climate to Thrive, that's based up on
Bar Harbor, right?
Bar Harbor, and they're hosting monthly conversations for communities to share ideas.
Great.
So a nice resource for Freeport and others.
Great. Yeah, that's really great. And it's something, so we have at GPCOG a Sustainability Professionals Roundtable where we sort of, you know, people can join at any time. We haven't had one yet this summer, but we'll probably plan one in the fall to start sharing ideas about, you know, for the next round of funding.
Carrie Kinney from the Freeport Conservation Trust. I will say, to kind of answer your question or give you another example, the Maine Coastal Program, which has been for decades, has all awardees have to do a one-page wonder to describe their project, what it was, how it worked, and the whole. And they've been pretty good, and so they post them online, and so there is a good example within the state infrastructure that could happen on what the programs are, what the grants are, and how people use the money and how it worked, to share information. And then a couple questions I have is how many awards were made in the first round, and what's the expectation of awards that will be granted in this round?
So there was 24 awards made to 29 communities in the first round, and that is everybody that applied. I think that they had a pot of money set aside, I cannot remember, a little over $1 million, I think they ended up spending, which I think was a little over what they thought. I do not know what the pot of money for the second round. They have not come out and said yet.
Which is this round.
Which is this round in September. So, you know, the message from the state is they're expecting it's going to be more competitive, but they also are trying to get money out the door as quickly as possible. And they need this to be a successful program because it really shows, you know, that the minimum wage is working and they're you know, making progress. So I'm anticipating that it will be slightly more competitive. I don't think it's going to be wildly more competitive. Is my hope. And when I do get more information, if I have any, I'm happy to share that.
Most of the towns in the first round got the full 50K?
All of them, yeah. Some of them applied for like 30K or a little bit less, but yeah.
Did they apply for less, or were they awarded less by the state?
My understanding was that some applied for less, not that they were. Actually, one example, they were awarded less because they took out part of the project and just focused on, the state didn't think part of the project was viable, so.
My rough calculation was that the average grant was $48,500, so it's pretty close to 50 for everybody.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It's pretty close. Yep. Yeah.
So because we're working with GP Cog, what are the towns again that you're, Brunswick?
Yarmouth, North Yarmouth,
Okay.
Brunswick, and Cumberland. Yep, all working.
So when you're doing the same
Yep, we're doing
process
same
with them.
process in all those
So
towns,
so the benefit of that is that if you see that one of Freeport's priorities is the same as Yarmouth or North Yarmouth,
Exactly.
and it would be a great sort of collaborative program like, bike paths.
Yep.
So people can keep going to Yarmouth and North
Yeah.
Yarmouth, not just put their bike, by the side of the road.
Yeah.
Is that part of what you are doing
Of course.
also?
Yep, definitely.
Before people start the application process, you'll have towns talking to each other, because I would imagine the state would prioritize
yes.
actions like that.
Yep, but yes to both. We were very much happy to make those connections and see my colleague Kelly's in Cumberland tonight. They have their workshop tonight. Yarmouth is next week. Brunswick's July, and North Yarmouth we're still sorting out. They have some lower capacity right now in their municipal staff. So yeah, we'll see the sort of broad scope of things as they, and we've already obviously been in discussions with Yarmouth somewhat on the sustainability coordinator front. So there's a lot of opportunity. And the message from GoPIF when Yarmouth connected with them was that like regional approaches and working together is very highly valued, and it certainly would make a competitive application, any sort of work. I sort of wish that they had, you don't get any more money. Like, it'd be cool if you got like $125,000 or something to incentivize working with another town, but they didn't do that this time around. But that would certainly be my feedback, is to try and like incentivize that a little bit more. Yeah. All really good questions. So if we don't have any others right now, feel free to, take a look at the posters, come ask questions if you have more, and please go vote. We can come back together if we want, but I don't think we need to in terms of my actual, presentation materials are all done. Like I said, for people virtually, please take a look at some of the posters and the information we've posted and vote on the survey. We'll also I think we can put the survey link up on the town website or somewhere.
Yeah, we can put under the municipal news, we can post whatever
Great.
we need to for links to tonight, so people can go back and look at it later, or people that weren't here to take any surveys can go do that.
Yeah, so forward to your friends, family, anybody in town that you think might be interested. You know, it's really great to get as much feedback as possible on priorities. It'd be really helpful.
So
Valerie?
one last question.
Yeah.
Is your presentation going to be available for people who are either here or at home to review if they need some time to think?
Yeah,
it through,
absolutely.
Or
Yep,
look at
we
it again?
can-
It was wonderful. So
Yeah,
great
we can post
information.
the slides. All of it is open for anybody to view, so we can do that. And actually, maybe we can put it, I don't know if it becomes part of the public record as this meeting.
We can put it online. We are televising and recording tonight, so we can ask cable TV if they can post this online for people to go back and watch, or quite often they can watch it on our YouTube channel as well. So there's definitely ways.
And these posters will be there too?
We have PDFs of these
Okay.
posters, yeah. And honestly, we can leave the posters with you. We don't need them.
Yeah, we can leave posters out here on display at Town Hall for people to come in and look at. And then we can put them online. We can do it under that municipal news, put everything you need to know in one spot.
Okay. And for those who are not here who may not vote right now, what is the timeline for closing the voting?
There's no reason why it couldn't be open through the month of, you know, for the next couple of weeks. I think it's sort of up to
Yeah,
Caroline. I mean, I think we need to start the process of scoping out the project, so we could maybe do 2 weeks and then.
Yeah, I think if you want to do maybe 2 weeks, it's such a busy time of year, and if the weather's nice, I don't want people to be like, oh, I'll do it later, I have a month.
Yeah,
and not
yeah,
go.
that's true. Maybe we'll
Put that
squeeze them.
timeline.
Yeah.
You know, we'll put the pressure on to get it done. But I do see that we just, we had a question, it was about chat, but we don't have the chat here. But we can open Q&A with people online.
Yeah, anybody that has questions online, please do reach out.
Is the voting on the town website, the GP code website?
The town website, yeah.
Right on
So
the town website.
exactly. Yeah, under municipal news, you can share that. Well, thank you all for coming, and please don't forget to vote. Thanks. Oh, you already put them out there. Okay, there are stickies in the hallway already, apparently. Let me put these up.